Poso maoni wiak, waiwanan kitana ni mua e yoski piataya posnotaman e yum MITW Podcast. A yospis piataya posnapi notaman e ne hisikimaka e yoso matnamin e hakihi.
Welcome to the Menominee Indian Tribe of Wisconsin podcast. We are your host, Gary Dodge.
And Shawano. On this episode, we are back to our usual quote-unquote guest, Vaughn Bowles, who is the Public Information Officer for the Menominee Indian Tribe of Wisconsin. And before we get started, I would like to remind people we do request you send in your COVID-19 related questions into us at podcast@mitw.org.
So, Vaughn, what are some safe ways to enjoy the Labor Day weekend?
So you might need to be a little more inventive than in years past. We'd recommend, avoiding large gatherings as much as possible. Things like the Shawano County Fair, where a lot of people are, might not be great for the Labor Day weekend this year. But we do recommend, outdoor activities, camping, hiking, picnicking with your family. I know we had an email in this last week of someone that suggested instead of going to the fair, do like backyard competitions with your family members and do things like three-legged races and wheelbarrow races and like donut eating on a string, and made me laugh and appreciate, silly things like that. I personally love to read. Barbecuing is always great. Just spend some time outdoors with your family and just try to relax as much as possible is what we'd suggest at this point.
All right, you brought up the fair. How will the tribe respond to the COVID case numbers if the numbers rise again?
So it depends. That's our favorite answer, though. We discussed it. It kind of depends. But if the numbers do start rising again in a manner that is alarming, the tribe will, revert back to a phase 1 operation with a lot of remote work. The businesses will be the buildings will only be open for appointment only. So it's kind of how we have operated in the past during lockdown earlier and just recently when we had the second bout of our phase 1 operation about 2 to 3 weeks ago. So it'd be kind of standard procedure at this point.
I have a follow-up question to that. So what are alarming numbers? Because we've seen really big jumps in Shawano County in the last 2 weeks or so.
Yeah, so Shawano County has had a wide jump in numbers, as has Oconto County. And so those are things we're definitely keeping an eye on. We did have one new case this week of a tribal member. I believe we also had a non-tribal member who lives in the county who also was diagnosed as a positive case. Those aren't quite enough to be alarmed about. They are things we need to be aware of. And people are, quarantining at this point. So really, it's hard to put a fine number on it. Usually if, between 5 to 12% of the tests run come back positive, that would kind of qualify as kind of a step back number for us.
The tests in Menominee you're talking about.
Right, correct.
So this week, there's been a lot of news about a vaccine possibly coming in late October or November. Can you talk about that a little bit?
So a vaccine in November it'd be really optimistic at this point. I'm not saying that'd be a bad thing. There are over 200 vaccines in development globally. A lot of them have reached the phase 3, which is the wide scale human testing. Which is good. I mean, it's positive to see that. A lot of them have elicited T-cell response, which is good because they've found that people tend to lose the antibodies to COVID-19 over about 2 to 3 months. So having that T-cell memory is really critical to having a vaccine that works long term. In addition to that, they also think that their estimations that if we can vaccinate between 60 to 70% of the population, that would be a point where we could consider that we almost have a herd immunity to COVID-19, which is good because earlier estimates, were in the 80 to 90% range of the population. So they think it's a much more manageable objective at this point. That said, like the DHS and the FDA kind of combined forces and resources under direction of the administration. They put together what they call Operation Warp Speed. They wanted to make sure there's enough funding and personnel to make sure that we can have vaccines out by 2021. The goal is to have 300 million doses by January 1st. So there are a couple contenders for that right now. One of them is the AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine. It's in its phase 3 trials. They're doing some wide testing, I believe in Brazil and South Africa. I'm not sure why they chose those locations, but they found that does have a really good T cell response. It's 4 times higher. They call it a 4-fold increase of antibodies produced as well when people get that vaccine. So it looks like it'll be a very productive and useful vaccine. Pfizer also is coming out with a vaccine that is in its third phase. They're working to have at least 100 million doses by 2021 ready. They're also expecting to produce at least several million doses and stuff by the end of the year. And the government has contracted with them to acquire at least, up to 500 million doses. So there's that. And then there are a couple others. Moderna is also very close. They started phase 3 back in July. And there's some speculation. November might be a little early, so I wouldn't hold my breath for November, but it is possible they might, have enough human volunteers early enough that they might be able to conclude their third phases and move into production. So it's possible, but I won't hold my breath.
So would this vaccine be like a once in a lifetime kind of vaccine, or more like the flu shot where you have to get one every year sort of thing? Or
No, based on the structure of the virus, this is probably more like a flu season virus, because COVID is an RNA type of virus. There's a lot of mutation and change to the virus. So this might be something that they are updating regularly long term. The only difference is they'd be using different RNA and protein markers and stuff for the virus. The mechanism of action will stay the same. They'll just put a slightly different mix of DNA materials in it.
Okay. So I had a question about face shields, because I've seen people wearing face shields, like workers wearing face shields, but no mask. Is that safe?
That's a good question. And when I thought I must have been, I don't know what kind of mood I was in when I started writing my notes. When I saw that, I was like, picture holding up a board in front of your face, and now imagine someone sneezing or coughing at your board.
Okay.
And I don't know why I left that in my notes, but you can picture that. It's actually a pretty good analogy. If you have something in front of your face, yes, it will stop some of the respiratory particulates and virus that is, projected straight at you. It doesn't necessarily block a lot of the viruses or particulates that are airborne and hanging in the air. And so that's why, covering your mouth and your nose with a mask would still be beneficial, even if you had a face shield. One of the big benefits of having a face shield, though, is that it helps to protect your eyes, which are very vulnerable to infection, like any sort of mucous membrane you have that a virus can land on can enter your body. And so face shields do help. Are they enough? I would say it depends on what kind of job you're doing and the level of protection you need. If you're, say, a dentist or a dental hygienist and you are, very close to a patient, working near where they might be breathing out on a regular basis, you might want both a face shield and a mask. If you're, several feet away from, your coworkers in an environment like an office environment, the face shield might not be necessary, but you might want to consider using a mask instead, because it would help filter out those particles. So it really depends on if you need to protect, your eyes and more of your face. So yes, they can be helpful in the right circumstance.
Okay, and then my last question was on whether you think cases are going to rise with the change of the season into fall and winter.
So this is a wonderful crystal ball question. It depends. So as weather gets colder, people tend to start spending more time inside, and that does raise their risk of coming down with COVID or the flu or a cold, just because in most cases air quality inside of a house isn't as clean as the outdoors. Um, Also, cold weather challenges our immune system more, and so we're more susceptible to getting sick. So it is very possible we could see an increased risk or an increased rise in the number of COVID cases, just like we would with the flu or the cold in the coming months. So, yeah, it's very possible we'll see a rise in it.
Okay, did you have any parting message for us going into Labor Day weekend?
Everyone, I hope you enjoy your weekend. Stay safe, stay healthy, and have a good time.
Thank you, Vaughn. Waiwanan for listening to the Menominee Indian Tribe of Wisconsin podcast. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Stitcher. You can also listen to the podcast on menominee-nsn.gov under the Community tab, and keep up to date by following us on Facebook at MITW Podcast. We do weekly updates with Vaughn, and again, we welcome any community questions you have regarding COVID-19, so please send those to us via email at podcast@mitw.org.